All right, let's get this thing kicked off. Thanks for joining, everyone. My name is Jeff Raymond. I'm a senior security engineer with Avanan. What that means is on a daily basis, I'm going around to customers and to prospects and talking to them about what their phishing needs look like, going and looking at their environments, seeing what the threat landscape really looks like. Today, I'm going to talk about how hackers, or threat actors as I call them, bypass Office 365 security. I am local here. I live in West Seattle, so if you ever want to connect, I have my LinkedIn there available to chat. Always happy to do that. What I've done in this presentation is I've gathered a lot of analysis reports and threat reports and just details from companies like Gartner and the Verizon Data Breach Report, also a report that Avanan did, the Global Phish Report, and I've tied this all together and I'll show some attacks here at the end from our data scientists, which they're looking at honeypots that we have set up all over the globe. They're bringing in about 1 million emails per week and they're looking for the new threats that no one else is seeing. We have a blog here, avanan.com/attacks. This is a cool blog that you can subscribe to from a vendor because you will not get marketing fluff from it. It is strictly for seeing the new attacks that are seen in the wild. So the first thing I'd like to talk about is some Gartner analysis, and I do this because probably everyone here has read a Gartner report at some point. And the point of this is that Gartner is doing a lot of analysis and research about Office 365 email and the security around that, and that primarily focuses around phishing. So the market guide for email security, something written in the middle of this year, is great if you're going and looking at some new vendors to decide if you want to do something beyond the default Office 365 security. We also have the Fighting Phishing 2024 site. What's fighting phishing going to look like in the future? What kind of new attacks are we going to see out there? As well as the Gartner Peer Insights voice of the customer. So a lot of people know Gartner because of the Magic Quadrant, right? You're going out to buy some new endpoint security, you go look at the Magic Quadrant to see who's in the top right, and those are the people you evaluate. Well, Gartner has gotten rid of the Magic Quadrant for email security because it's such a mature space. So what they now have is this Peer Insights voice of the customer, and I actually like this more because it is not reviews from Gartner, it's reviews from customers that are using these products, and every year they come out with this award winner for the top email security vendors, so really nice to look at. They also do these technical professional advices where it's basically, hey, you have this situation, here's what you should do in this situation. Great analysis there. We also have this Austrian research report, and this is if you want to spend 3 days reading a report because it is massive. It's anything you could possibly want to see with Office 365, different attack vectors that we're seeing now with, if you want to look for specific ways to defend against leakage of sensitive data. They have a whole section on DLP you can go look at. They update this on a quarterly basis. They just released the Q3 report. Tons of great information within Office 365 here. And then the one I'm sure everyone's heard of is the Verizon Data Breach Report, and you've probably seen shows or another presentation today where people referenced something similar to this, the attack timeline, right? How long does it take for someone to compromise an account or a company, and how long does it take that company to discover that compromise is there? Well, 3 years ago, it was over a year for a company to discover. The good news is it's cut in half by now. It's down to the months, which is great because they've hired great security professionals like yourselves to go and look for these threats, and you guys have invested in some excellent tools to help you get in front of these attacks and discover these compromises early on. A key stat that we pulled out of this is 60% of the time the compromised account is a webmail-based platform. Office 365, that's what these threat actors are after. They're after the O365 credentials. And finally here, we have the Avanan Global Phish Report. This is a report we did on 55 million emails over a 1-year period, about 1 million emails per week. And we called some pretty cool stats out. 1 in 99 emails is phishing. That's a lot. That's about 1% of all emails are phishing. 25% of phishing emails were able to bypass Office 365's default security. That's EOP. 1 in every 25 branded emails is phishing. That's crazy. We have some huge brands here in Seattle, Microsoft, Amazon, Costco. Tons of huge brands here. 1 in 25 of those emails we saw was phishing. This other stat here, the 98%, I thought this was going to be higher. 98% of all emails containing a crypto wallet is phishing. This is the sextortion emails, right? Where you have an email coming through saying, hey, I've hacked you. The proof I've hacked you is I'm sending it from your own email address. I have a video of you doing something weird. So send me Bitcoin or else I'll tell your friends and family you're a weirdo. Usually it's a bit more vulgar than that, but I see these all day, every day. 98% seems kind of low. And over half of all phishing emails contain malware. This is a great report available for download right now, avanon.com/2019phish. My marketing guy in the back is going to be happy with me giving you all these links. So cloud is the vector, the target, and the source. We're seeing that the threat actors have moved to the cloud. They didn't just give up when people started moving to the cloud and say, we're done with this. It's actually made their jobs a little bit easier. They're able to go after credentials and get full access to an O365 environment. So the point here is the threat actors have not slowed down. They've just moved their attempts to the cloud. Even more proof here, most breaches start with phishing. And next behind that is use of stolen credentials, which they typically go hand in hand here, right? Web application is the attack vectors. They're going after typically Office 365 or Google Suite. They're no longer having to do these Trojans and command and control. It's mostly just web applications they're after. You can do a lot with credentials. This is a cool slide because I think it's easily arguable that Microsoft Office is the most successful brand of all time. We've never seen adoption rates like we had with Microsoft Office, especially Office 365. I bet you the vast majority of you in here are in Office 365 or have plans to move there. It's just we're not seeing this much brand adoption. And the reason I say this is because that's why these threat actors are going after Office 365. Everyone's on it, right? If everyone's on it, it's an easier source. But let's take a step back here. Let's talk about when you owned the data center, when it was your users and your data and your servers and your security, and it was all your responsibility, right? You were responsible for protecting against phishing attacks and malware and compromised accounts and so on and so forth. And you were able to do that because you could plug appliances in, you had Christmas every day with your blinking lights, and you just don't quite have that anymore when you move to the cloud. You can't roll up to Microsoft's data center and say, here, plug these in. It just doesn't work, unfortunately. So when you move to the cloud, it is still your users and your data, but it's now their servers and their security. So who's responsible for what? Well, thankfully, we have this thing called the shared responsibility model that makes it very clear, and there's very, very clear lines drawn here on who's responsible for what. It makes a lot of sense when you're in Azure or AWS and you're building your own applications, you're responsible for your own OS and all of that, but when you move to the cloud, when you move to the SaaS model, I should say, essentially when you move to Office 365, you're giving up a lot of responsibility for that network layer and the OS layer and so on and so forth, but still, it is your users and your data that you are responsible for. And how do you know you're responsible? Because I know each and every one of you has read the terms of service for every single application that you're using, right? Each and every single one of those says Microsoft is not responsible, Amazon's not responsible, so on and so forth. We are not responsible for the misuse of anything to not have proper security protocols around these applications. I think Amazon says it best. They're responsible for security of the cloud. You are responsible for security in the cloud. There was actually a Microsoft VP of engineering. He came out, he knew he was being recorded. He said, we consider customers' data toxic sludge. We don't want to see it, we don't want to touch it, we want nothing. And it makes sense because it's not, you don't want to have that responsibility, but that's just kind of the line we've drawn here. Since we're talking about Office 365 here, this is an exact excerpt from the terms of service for Office 365. It essentially says Microsoft is not responsible for anything you do that results from your failure to follow appropriate security protocols. It's smart of them to do that. So, if it's your users and your data that you're responsible for, how are you protecting against these types of attacks, against the phishing and the malware and the account compromise? Again, you can't roll your stack of security up anymore. So we have some options here. We have the layers of protection. So we know 1 in 99 emails are phishing. We know that about 7.3% of users will click on that link before training. But the good news is 87% of companies out there have deployed some sort of security around this. So what are our options here? Well, we have EOP, Exchange Online Protection. That's the default Office 365 security that everyone gets when they go to Office 365. A lot of people are saying, well, that's not quite good enough. So we have ATP, Advanced Threat Protection. Plan 1 and Plan 2 are available for you. And this offers some additional configuration changes you can do. You get your safe links and safe attachments. You can be a lot more safe with this. But we're still hearing people saying that's not enough. So we have our secure email gateway. The traditional approach that was abundant, much more readily available back when email was on-prem, because that was the only way. You had to have a proxy out in front. You had to have your MX records pointed at something. But we still have that in the cloud. We have our endpoint agents. We have our endpoint security, of course, is a necessary layer. And we have our user training. We have the PhishMe's and the KnowBefores and the Sophoses of the world that are doing these phishing simulations, that are reducing the click rates of the users and giving training where they see fit. And then we have this new approach of the post-delivery protection. Gartner's given it the name of CES, the Cloud Email Security Supplement, where it's looking at emails that have already made it to the mailbox. You have a user report an email to you that says, hey, I think this is bad. The analyst says, you know what, that is bad. I want to know who else received that email, and then I want to rip that email out. That's what the post-delivery security is looking at. So user training is very important. I used to work for PhishMe, so I'm a little bit biased here. But it's very important. Verizon Data Breach Report showed that if you're training over time, you're going to get your click rate down to around 3%. That was the very best of customers I saw. Typically, you're looking at 5 or 6%, but it's okay. So 7.3% of users will click on average. After training, we get down to 3%. But the problem is, even out of those 3% that will click on their desktop, 18% of them will click on mobile. It's harder to train that, right? I had a customer back when I worked at PhishMe, and they said, we don't have any budget. I want you to scare our CIO. And I said, okay, that sounds fun. And so they said, I want you to build a phishing simulation that the most amount of people will click for. Well, this was around the time, remember the solar eclipse that was happening, and everyone wanted those solar eclipse glasses that no one could find. So I created this phishing email that says, hey employees, we love you so much. We're going to give away some solar eclipse glasses. All you have to do is click this link and enter in your username and password. Can you guess how many people clicked? 87% of users clicked, and 62% entered in their credentials. They bought the next day. It was, it was easy. So this is a great graphic here that talks about those 1 in 99 emails that come through are phishing, what Microsoft's default security is doing with them. About 20% are marked as phishing, 50% as spam, 25 as clean, and 5 as whitelisted. And we'll talk about why whitelisting is dangerous here in a second. But another fun stat that comes out of this is Microsoft analyzes 400 billion emails a month. That's a lot. But out of those, they're detecting 600 million as malicious. And when I first saw that number, I was like, dang, 600 million, that's a lot. That's a lot of emails to call as malicious. But what it translates to is only a 0.0015% catch rate of phishing emails. And we're seeing up here, the rate's more like 1%. So there's a disconnect there. So let's talk more about why whitelisting is scary. I go into customers' environments all the time, and they'll have their own domain whitelisted. And that's scary because now I can go out and edit some headers and send an email that looks like it's coming from your own domain, and it comes through as whitelisted. No scanning gets done in that email. And they tell me, well, I do it because Salesforce impersonates my name, but there's just other ways to do it. Make it more where it's I whitelist this domain if it comes from this IP range. That makes more sense. Or do something with SPF to get around that. Which takes me into SPF and DMark. DMark is huge right now. Everyone's doing DMark, and it's the best way to protect your domain so people can't impersonate you, not only internally, but to your customers and to your vendors. If you have DMark enabled here, not only do you not allow people to send as your domain, but you get a copy if anyone tries to do that. If someone tries to impersonate your domain, you get a cool copy of it, and you say, oh, this person is trying to impersonate me. I'm not going to talk too much about DMark here, but we did do an awesome webinar with a company called DMartian. They were one of the first ones doing DMark enforcement. This is available, avanon.com/DMark. You can watch this very in-depth report on why DMark is important and how you can enforce it. So let's start diving into some of these pinhole vulnerabilities that we've been seeing. And this is reports from our data scientists that are looking for these new threats in the wild. And Gartner's even came out and said part of their Fighting Phishing 2024 site is they're saying as Microsoft's market share grows, people are going to specifically target Microsoft's defenses, and these attacks that I'm about to show you here are examples of exactly that. So base Drecker attack. When you're building a website, or in this case an email, of course you're able to write that in HTML. Well, when you write in HTML, there's this thing called a base command. I wish I had a laser pointer here, but you'll just have to know where your eyes should be. The base command essentially says, for the rest of this web page, or email in this case, I want this domain, the https domain.com, to be the base of every link. Because I'm going to use this over and over and over again, I just want to put the path. So you can break up the link in that way. Well, what some threat actors found earlier this year is if you break up a link in this way, Microsoft doesn't scan it. This was a glitch by Microsoft. They came out and quickly patched it up. But this is a proof that people are specifically targeting Microsoft, right? We didn't see this with any other email vendor. Zero font attack. Probably a few of you have heard of this one. This was a pretty nifty one. So this originated because when Microsoft scans and they see a brand name within an email, they do some additional scanning to look for brand impersonation. Well, as you may have guessed, threat actors don't like additional scanning. They want the base level of scanning. So what they found they could do is where it says Microsoft sees offers terrific service, they would add those characters in red in the middle of the word office, but in zero font text. So to the end user, they see office. To Microsoft, it says offers terrific service, and they see, you're damn right we do, and it goes right through. Again, this was something that was only targeting Microsoft. This is why we see this many attacks. This was something that they implemented a natural language engine to look for stuff exactly like this, but I just saw this in a customer's environment last week, so I don't know if they've figured something new out, but it was still getting through. ZWASP attack. This is that sextortion email we were talking about earlier, right? I bet you a lot of you have some mail flow rules in place that says if I see the word Bitcoin in an email, I'm setting the SCL score to 9 or just straight up block and quarantine. Well, threat actors figured a way around this also. They would put this zero width space into the email that would break it up this way. So to the scanning, you see all this HTML code. But to the end user, they see that HTML basically means zero width space, which means it's nothing essentially. I don't know why there's even an HTML for it. But it would break it all up so those mail flow rules wouldn't work. That's why somebody will be like, hey, how'd this email with the word Bitcoin get through? And this is what's happening. They also found they could do this with links. They could break up the links in this way, and it would throw off the scanning. So let's break down the EOP and ATP. And ATP's come out with this Plan 1 and Plan 2. This is fairly new. And Plan 2 is awesome. They give you a lot more threat trackers. They have this new Explorer that makes finding emails a lot easier. They have their attack simulator where you can do the phishing simulations. And they even have this automated incident response, which is great for going and finding phishing emails and starting to take action on them. This ATP Plan 2 is great. And then, of course, you get your safe links and safe attachments. But what we did as part of that study I was talking about earlier, we did Office 365 versus Google Mail, the miss rates essentially. How many phishing emails as a percentage are these missing? And what's great is Office 365 is missing quite a bit less than Gmail. And it used to be different about 2 years ago. It used to be Gmail was catching a lot more. But what we also did is research on what EOP caught versus ATP. For those of you in the back, there's actually 2 lines there. What we found essentially is that ATP just wasn't catching a whole lot more than EOP. And this was back in April, and I know ATP's made some improvements since then, so we need to redo this study. But we just saw that since ATP is primarily looking for malicious payload, not really the behavior of the email, there was a lot being missed. So what are our other options? We have the secure email gateway, right? The biggest thing that we see here is what about the internal threats? Secure Email Gateway natively is going to look at inbound and outbound email. They can do some internal scanning, but not natively. And the other problem I see is what about Slack and Teams? I bet you your employees have a pretty healthy skepticism of everything coming through via email, but I bet you they trust 100% of what they see in Slack and Teams. I saw this in a customer's environment. Compromised account, logged into Slack, was sending direct messages via Slack. That was another link to go credential harvesting websites. And they were pretty slick, except they sent it to every single employee. So it just took one to catch it, and then they were able to get in front of it. If they were smart and only sent it to 1 or 2 targets, this probably would have been another compromised account that would have been taken a while to find. So we need to have some security around Slack and Teams as well. And we're even seeing exploits that are specifically targeting the secure email gateway. So this was one that, say you have an email going to IBM.com. Of course, it has to go to the secure email gateway, and then it hits Office 365 if it's safe. Well, what some threat actors found is they could leverage these O365 specific aliases, right? When you create an account up in O365, you have this other alias where it's domain.mail.protection.outlook.com and domain.onmicrosoft.com, right? Those are their O365 accounts. Well, some threat actors found if they just send it directly to that O365 account, it bypasses the secure email gateway. It goes straight to the O365 inbox. Tony Akers over at practical365.com was the first to discover this, and he goes through a great walkthrough on how to remediate this type of incident. Essentially, there's some mailflow rules you can create, or you can just say, only allow email to my primary address. That's the simplest way. We did a study on this as well. We do a lot of studies, I guess. We did this study on 200,000 domains. We found out 68% of them were vulnerable to this. And the study we did was actually a dumb one because we just guessed what their domain was on their Amex record instead of actually looking. So this number is, it could have been higher. So I know a lot of you are about to look at me like I'm crazy here, and you may be right, but this is a new thing I've been seeing getting passed around, and is when you're going to build your security infrastructure and your security practices, assume one of your accounts is compromised. And it may not be true, and I hope it's never true, but when you think about it in that way, you're going to make better security decisions, right? If you no longer have the trusted inside and untrusted outside, you just say everything's untrusted, you're going to make better security decisions. And I think this came about back with the collection 1 dump with, what it was, 1 billion usernames and passwords. That's where a lot of these sextortion emails have started coming from. It's just, I know it's a weird approach, but it's been gaining a lot of steam here. Let's talk about one more attack that probably a lot of you have heard of, the fish point attack. This one got a lot of news coverage because it hit some pretty high profile companies, and it was unique because it operated almost entirely within Office 365. This would start with a compromised account, typically from a phishing email. That compromised account would send an internal email with a SharePoint file. That SharePoint file would then have a link, or the SharePoint file would host another file, usually a OneDrive or something like that, or sorry, a OneNote file that would contain a malicious URL that would then send it out to Office 365. And the reason this was so successful is because when Microsoft sees an internal email with a SharePoint link, they don't scan that link. SafeLinks doesn't hit it. Because it's internal and it's SharePoint, it should be safe, and it's faster to send it that way. That's why this attack was so successful. Oh, last thing I'll talk about here, insider threat. So alternate inbox method. How many of you have ever, I won't even ask the question, but this is, this is if you have a compromised account. What they'll typically do when they compromise that account is they'll start blasting out a bunch of emails, and that account says, oh, they're no longer allowed to send emails because they're getting marked as spam. I know some of you have dealt with it. I won't put anyone under the bus here. But what they'll typically do here is they'll create these mail flow rules that say anything coming into the inbox that's a response to my email that I sent, send it directly to the trash. And even more so, instead of going to the trash, send that email to me so I can take a look at it at my external address. So if you've ever had a compromised account, I bet you've gone and cleared out mail flows that look similar to this. This is another huge threat vector that we're seeing. So what this leads to is the couple of vendor-y type of slides I have to do. I'd rather you guys just come to the booth and talk to me, or we can talk at happy hour. But what Avanan is doing is total email and cloud security. We're able to deploy as an app within Office 365, no MX records to change. We protect from the inside, right? This is literally an app within Office 365. And we're able to implement some best-of-breed technology. I know it's somewhat hard to see the logos down at the bottom there, but some of the best companies in the world have partnered with us. We've cloudified their applications to provide their service within our appliance. So let's talk about where we would fit into this workflow. We have all of these different tools here, and you can really narrow it down and say that we have our pre-inbox delivery, post-delivery. We're able to fill the gap of both sides of this, right? We're able to, there's Gartner's terms. So we sit in the middle here. We're sitting inside the cloud, unlike a secure email that sits outside the cloud. But we're still able to scan the emails in line before they reach the user's inbox. So we're getting rid of the need for ATP. We're getting rid of the need for the secure email gateway because that's part of Avanan. Post-delivery is done within Avanan as well, so what you're left with is a layered approach here. You're able to layer Avanan on top of EOP. The reason we're able to do this and the reason that we think we're in a really great position is we have this patent on the inline approach where we're able to scan the emails inline before it reaches the user's inbox. All the other API-based vendors has to allow it to go to the inbox and they do the post-delivery remediation. So let's take one more look at this fish point attack. How could Avanan have solved this? Well, Avanan scans for compromised accounts. We look for suspicious geolocation activity, logging in from Nigeria. We scan for weird activity, creating mail flow rules, like what I showed you there. We'll call that out and be able to block that account. We also scan internal emails. We don't think it's safe if it's internal. We don't care. We're going to scan it no matter what. And Avanan is able to scan your OneDrive and SharePoint files. So when this file got uploaded with that malicious link to SharePoint or OneDrive, it would have been blocked. And we also do URL analysis. If it's in an attachment, if it's in the body of the email, we're able to do some URL analysis. We partner with some very large vendors such as Google Safe Browsing to see if that link is going out to a credential harvesting or a drive-by download website. So that in a whole is Avanan. Again, patented technology. We're able to protect the entire suite. To use the buzzword, it's the single pane of glass for all of your security tools. And this is how we're able to protect your users and your people in the cloud all in one spot. I have some links here for everything I showed today, but that's all I have for you all. Thanks for the time. If there's any questions, happy to answer them. Any questions? All right, see you all at happy hour.